after reading your book,
Mhm.
Doppelganger, and then having friends, who I had never had the discussion around Israel-Palestine before with, who I would call liberal Zionists. Liberal Zionist friends sort of who are justice-minded, who, believe in civil rights, um, who are otherwise progressive, quote Golda Meir at me. Like, tell me that one day we'll be able to forgive the Arabs. We'll be able to forgive ourselves for killing the no, we'll be able to forgive the Arabs for killing us, but we'll never be able to forgive them for making us kill their children. And then, like, are you seriously quoting that at me right now? And there's just like, it feels like all of a sudden my friends, and yeah, they are all they are Jewish, they're Jewish Americans, and this is not, I have tons of anti-Zionist Jewish friends, married one, but suddenly there's been a turn, and it's like, well, this is what we must do
Mm.
in order to protect our safety, in order to protect that never again motto that so many American Jews and others are speaking out against, as evidenced by all the mass actions we've seen over the
Yeah.
last weeks. But
Yeah. But you
you
quoted Biden, right? And that's
yeah.
not the only thing he said. He also said something just extraordinary. Um, this is this was a month ago. Well, this was definitely before October 7th. Some people are quoting it as if it happened since, but he actually said it before. He said, "Without the state of Israel, no Jew will be safe."
Yeah.
Right? Which is a really incredible thing for the president of the United States to say, um, because it's actually his job to keep everybody safe in the United States, including Jewish people. Like, they shouldn't need another state. We shouldn't need another state in order to be safe. But that was his way of expressing support for Israel, because that is absolutely central to what Zionism has told generations of Jewish people, that it is our safety in a world that will never accept us, that will always turn on us, um, and that anti-Semitism is this primordial force,
Right.
that is outside of time and history, that there's no way of confronting it, that any kind of attempts to fight it through multiracial, multi-ethnic alliances and fighting for universal rights, that's all a waste of time. The only thing you can do is put a gun to its head and force it into submission. And so I think what you're hearing from your sort of soft Zionist friends who are suddenly becoming hard Zionists is that this is the education that they grew up with.
Right.
And I write about this in the book that, um, hopefully people will forgive me, but I draw on Philip Roth a fair bit, because he wrote this absolutely incredible doppelganger novel called Operation Shylock, which is very relevant in this moment. And the plot of Operation Shylock is that the main character, who is named Philip Roth and who has written all of Philip Roth's book,
Mhm.
is being dogged by a fake Philip Roth who's running around Jerusalem trying to engineer a reverse exodus of the Jews back to Eastern Europe, because he's convinced that everything took a wrong turn when Judaism went all in with Zionism. And he's sure that Israel is going to become the coffin of the Jews. Unless
Mhm.
they get out, it'll be another Holocaust. And the reason it's called Operation Shylock is because the argument is that every Jew has a doppelganger, and that doppelganger is the money lending, mutilating Shylock in Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice. And
Mm.
so that stands in for this primordial force that is anti-Semitism, and this idea that you'll never shake your real doppelganger, who the Gentile world sees as you. They might put up with you
Mm.
in the short term, but in the long term, they're always going to see you as Shylock. They're always going to turn on you. And that's why you need this hyper fortress state of your own. Um, and
Which is
so,
a
yeah,
terrifying way to live. I mean, and it's like, and also to be educated. I just wanna read,
but that's
can I
why
read
it's
just
so dangerous for Biden to reinscribe that idea, to say you will never be safe without
well,
Israel. Like, it's one thing for Netanyahu to say it, but for Biden to say it, it's like we are in this cycle of what my friend Cecily Saraski calls re-traumatization.
yes.
We think that we're remembering the Holocaust, but we're actually being re-traumatized by these kind of ritualistic reenactments, which are designed to keep us in this state of hyper fear as if they're about to bang down the doors. And those responses that you're hearing are at people having those trauma buttons pushed over and over again. And I get why people are sick of hearing about Jewish trauma in a moment when the Israeli state is killing Palestinian babies on a massive scale. I 100% get that. But I don't think you can understand Israel's politics without understanding the weaponization of trauma,
Yeah.
and the difference between remembering and re-traumatization.
Right. And it seems like, you know, the Israeli state is likes the latter. They like the re-traumatization. It's easier. It's more malleable. I mean, you know, as I've been trying to
Essential part of their story.
it's a central part of their story, and as I've been trying to empathize with some of the wild things that folks are telling me, at least on that side, I think about, you know, post 9/11, the United States, and granted, very different, but imagine living in a perpetual state. I mean, some people were born, many people born after 9/11, but a perpetual state of fear, perpetual code red, perpetual, you know, what's the terror alert? Like, that is a horribly traumatic way to live generally. And I think you also, before I go on to, I mean, let's just go back to Biden just really quickly, because it is very interesting that his press secretary just recently sort of equated, you know, Palestinian solidarity marches, or as they're saying, anti-Israel, which I'm so done with this pro-Israel, anti-Israel, pro-Palestine. Like, that language is so old to me. But you know, the press secretary basically was like, yeah, look, Biden ran for president after seeing the Nazis in Charlottesville, effectively equating, you know, the Palestine solidarity marches with the Charlottesville Nazis. And then on top of that, Biden's basically saying, well, there's ultimately nothing I can do with it because Israel's the only safe place for Jews. And so this is someone who wants to stand up to a real anti-Semitism coming from the right, which we didn't get to this, but the right absolutely loves the idea of Israel as a lab. That's what they want the U.S.-Mexico border to look like. They want all, you know, Israeli companies have already been contracted to build, you know, surveillance apparatuses on the border. But that's why they love it. They feel like, yeah, let's build that between
Also,
us.
anti-Semites have always loved Israel because they get to get rid of their Jewish people,
Right.
right? Like,
Right.
and this is the thing about the memories that are being kept alive. There's always a little bit of truth in it, right? And you know, I think that yes, Israel is a settler colonial nation, and we need to understand the way it is a kind of a doppelganger of the settler colonialism that influenced Hitler. You know, the whole idea of his you know, elbow room, Lebensraum, like expanding into the east, was modeled on the western frontier. You know, and he modeled concentration camps after British concentration camps in Africa, and he was very open about this. And and anti-colonial scholars, you know, have drawn out comparisons that many people who were in denial about the violences of colonialism did not see in Hitler. You know, you know, W.E.B. Du Bois, Aimé Césaire wrote in the 50s about how Hitler was influenced explicitly by colonization, by transatlantic enslavement. You know, I don't have all the quotes at my fingertips, but you know, they were saying like nothing he did had not been done before in some other form, and that also is a challenge to the idea of the Holocaust as being sort of impossible to compare to any other genocide, to
Right.
it being outside of history. That's connected to this idea of anti-Semitism as this primordial force that you can't contextualize historically, right?
And that's so wild, because how do we how do you break through that idea? Because I think you do that so well, which is like, yes, the Holocaust was very uniquely evil in all of these ways, but it was also sort of, again, like you're saying,
It was
replicating.
Fordist. It was Fordist. I mean, it used the technologies of the day that were not available to previous genocidaires, but the logics,
It's too fancy of a name for them. Genocidaires is like,
and
that's what that's way
this
too.
is the logic that Sven Lindqvist and then Raoul Peck in his film for HBO, which was, his series Exterminate All the Brutes, make the argument that the exterminatory mindset begins in Southern Europe, in Italy and Portugal, with the expulsions of Jews and Muslims in the same year that Columbus set sail for the Americas.
Right.
And that idea that of the civilization, the civilizing project that exterminates everything in its way, in its way, then loops back to Europe, and wages war inside Europe through the Nazi Holocaust. But that makes the argument that it wasn't recognized as when it came home, when it came
Right.
back to Europe, where it began. But then you have Netanyahu right now saying this is a war of civilizations, right?
Yes.
Because there's another chapter in this story, and the chapter of the story is Europe didn't want the Jews, North America didn't want the Jews, Australia didn't want the Jews, and the quote unquote Jewish problem gets quote unquote solved by spatially displacing it onto Palestine, and the mantle of whiteness gets passed to the Jews, and it's their turn. And
Yeah.
this is somehow imagined as reparations, except it's replication. So we are in this historical loop, but this is why we have to admit that Israel is founded in trauma. Like it is both a replica of settler colonialism and also a new iteration of it, because it's being cast as reparations for genocide. This is a new twist. And if we can't sort of look at that complexity and understand how central it is to Israel's own narrative of itself, I'm not sure we get out of the loop.
I mean, I've been talking about this with Matt, my husband, a lot, and we were just like sort of exclaiming at how, like, it seems the fact that it is a loop, the fact that it is using trauma, weaponizing trauma against another, and to perpetuate yet another genocide, it's like almost the hackiest Hollywood script you've ever read. Like, it's so painfully ironic that, like, no one really believes that that's what's happening, but that is exactly what is happening. And so, it is, yes. And I guess my question is, and we should move on from this because I have other
I'm not
questions.
sure. I'm not sure we should.
I mean, we shouldn't, but it's
Yeah.
but about like breaking through, because
Mm.
how am I
Yeah.
as a Gentile gonna say, hey, Jews, your trauma is real, but the Holocaust and what is happening now, these are not unique situations. And every time I try to compare Palestinians to South Africans, right? There's always pushback. No, it's different. No, the
Mhm.
Holocaust was completely separate and different, and never, or before or after, has
Yeah.
there been anything as heinous? And it's like, but if we actually understand that
Yeah.
that there isn't, sadly, anything super special about it, and we aren't harboring some secret anti-Semitic, chip that gets activated,
Mm.
and that the Palestinians aren't mad that, like, the Jews run media, in air quotes. Like, they're not Marjorie Taylor Greens up in here. Like, they just want peace and land, and to ideally return to the homes that they were forced from. Although, that's whatever. But, like, do you know what I mean? Like, that it's sort of it's like I hit a wall. And I'm not asking you to tell me how to talk to soft Zionists. I just,
Well, I think it
yeah,
is helpful to say every genocide is different. Like
sure,
it isn't a one-to-one. And you and the reason why we have international humanitarian law is because every genocide is different, but they're still not allowed, right?
right,
Like every war crime is different. Every war crime has a story for why this particular war crime is okay. And the reason we have international humanitarian legal architecture, which is the legacy of the Holocaust in the Second World War. And that is
Right.
why it is so offensive to me as a Jew to watch a state, in the name of Jewish safety, try to detonate that entire international humanitarian legal infrastructure because it is getting in the way of this latest chapter in this bloody story, right? That is why they want to get Antonio Gutierrez fired. That is why they
Yes.
are willing to detonate whole parts of the UN if they are to be held by these laws. And when they say it's our turn to do Dresden, it's our turn to do Hiroshima, that is the whole reason we have this architecture, so that there isn't another one, right? That says that collective punishment is illegal. And the whole reason why we have a genocide convention is so that we have some definitions that transcend the specificities, right? So this is why, honestly, Francesca, and you haven't asked me about it, but you're welcome to. Like, I wrote a controversial article for The Guardian, talking about why we
Yes.
have to stay true to international humanitarian law, regardless of who is violating the laws. And it doesn't work to celebrate it in the morning and then invoke it in the afternoon. And I know there's a lot of controversy about the word celebrate. I didn't like that it was in the headline, but I do believe there was that there was some ambivalence on the left about whether standing with the oppressed means no matter what, or whether it is constrained by international law. I believe Palestinians under occupation have a right under international law to armed resistance, and that is limited by the same international laws
Sure.
that allow for that armed resistance to occupation also says that you can't target civilians.
Yeah, I
And
mean, I think
yeah.
I definitely was surprised by the article when I read
Mhm.
it. And I also felt like I saw it from so many other folks that I was like, I know you've got way more tools and you're like just intellectually. And I was like, I was waiting for that. And so I'm so grateful to have you on now. But I granted I wasn't super online combing for like the anti-Semitic remarks and I did see people posting days after like a Palestine flag. Not my tack. Like that definitely
The
that's
Palestine
not
flag is not the issue.
no,
And
no, no,
I don't
but
want to get into it. I just think we need to be very clear. And I think lots of Palestinian leaders have been very clear.
yes,
Um, I've been a supporter of BDS since 2008 or 9. And what the BDS call says is until Israel complies with international law.
right,
And it's international human rights law is a really important tool in this struggle. And so I saw people, not Palestinians actually, being pretty casual about it.
right,
And I think right now, when we're all invoking it, um, to define what is happening now as genocide, which says that is an attempt to eliminate a people in whole or in part, we have to there is only the moral force of these laws. Like, we're not able to haul them up in front of the ICC. We have a moral force, and that we lose if we're not willing to apply it to our side.
sure. And
Um,
and like it is very interesting. However, there's always like the pushback of like, well, the US is a settler colonial nation. And like, what about you going to give back your land? And it's like, if on the corner there was a skirmish, a battle between, native Angelinos. I do not know who originally was
yeah.
here, and that is terrible. But the indigenous folks here and the police force, yeah, you're fucking right. I would have something to say about it. And I know which side I would be on. But it's going back to your like, well, why can't we have our Hiroshima? Why can't we have our war crime? It is very, very terrible to say so. And yet we should state that the United States, with the war in Iraq, very much trampled international law and
Absolutely. And
um,
Israel does all the time.
sure.
Um, and these are weak tools, but unfortunately, they're kind of the only tools available.
Yeah. I think
Um,
the other thing I wanted to say, and this just in terms of the like celebrating Hamas, I think there was, when you frame it as like a prison break, I think
mhm,
I understand that there was excitement for like
mhm,
Gazans after this
for sure.
blockade and this siege for however long broke free. You hear Gazans who are like, their first reaction, I apologize, but their first reaction was like, whoa, we did that? Like, damn, you know? And yes, yeah, we're talking about murder. We're talking about civilians. We're talking also about 200 plus hostages who not accounted
Mhm.
for. Who knows what's being done to actually free them? Certainly, bombs are not helping. Hamas wants prisoner exchanges. But look, it took
Right.
Boots Riley on Twitter to be like, I looked at Hamas's charter, which is funny because who among us has been like, ooh, Hamas's charter? Nobody. Because we assume it says like death to all Jews, blah, blah, blah. But it doesn't. It talks about it doesn't seek war with the Jewish people, only with Zionism that drives the occupation of Palestine. They say they're not a revolutionary force. They like just on and on. And this again is not supposed to like soften everyone's view. It's just to say this isn't like, it is not ISIS.
Mhm.
It is absolutely not ISIS. And there is a point, again, in
But
terms
that's
of,
the whole point of casting it as a pogrom, as hate crimes, as you know, the day of the most Jewish bloodshed since the Holocaust, is it
right.
lifts it out of a geopolitical grinding occupation and battle over borders and land and rights, and puts it into this other story about
Yeah,
the primordial hatred of the Jews, which is where Netanyahu wants it, right? So, but what I'm saying is, it is a crime. It's a war crime. It violates this code. There is a right to armed resistance. There is not a right to target civilians.
right.
So that's part of the reason why I think it does matter. And I think we need to understand what's happening when it gets called a pogrom, when it gets cast as Jew hatred, as opposed to an anti-Israeli massacre. I mean, I think there were massacres, and I think that's a war crime. But we need to look at it geopolitically, and I think you're absolutely right. There is a vested interest in casting Hamas as being completely irrational, having no agenda other than hatred. And we remember this from post 9/11, right? You want the more irrational your enemies are, the less you have to actually look at any of these historical drivers, right?
I mean, it's very interesting, and even
Or
I've said the
drivers.
terrorism word, but like having terrorism come back into, you know,
Mm.
the vernacular and just like the zeitgeist is like, have we not learned from this word a little bit? Because, you know, and again, learning from the Afghanistan war, anyone who harbors or associates with terrorists will not be negotiated with. And that's how you get utter lawlessness in the after the, you know, toppling of the Taliban, after the toppling of Saddam Hussein. Nobody who knew how to run a government at all, albeit a very, you know, an Islamist, you know, whatever, draconian government, 20 years later, they're back in power. I mean, it's just like, we'll talk about
Yeah.
Hillary Clinton later, after you can nope out of that discussion. But
Mhm, mhm.
I guess we should turn to talking a little bit about the book because I there's a particular
I mean,
question.
we have been talking about the book, though. To be clear,
Yeah, yeah,
this
yeah,
is
yeah. Well,
it's super
it's
interesting to me that so much of the response to the book has completely avoided the Israel material.
have
Like,
you not been talking about that throughout? I
no,
mean,
people are afraid of it, which I find, like, people don't want to talk about about Nazism as a doppelganger of settler colonialism, nor do they want to talk about Israel's doppelganger politics. They want to talk about Steve Bannon and Naomi Wolf. So I'm really happy to talk about like the
well, let's do
final
it.
third of
Well,
the
we
book.
don't have fuck those guys. I mean,
Okay.
here's what I want to read because I do think it's really, you basically go through this entire like journey of going down the rabbit hole of another intellectual, another author who, for lack of a better term, even though you don't use it, was basically red pilled and went off the deep end. Naomi Wolf, who many people confused you for. And with, and we'll talk about separately, but you kind of have this unselfing journey as you title this chapter, which is so, it's very Buddhist and beautiful. And you talk about, you know, how you kind of let your brand slip and maybe people didn't know about you. And then here comes Naomi Wolf and she's fucking everywhere and she's all tweeting up a storm. But you kind of in the middle of, you know, after you talk about Israel Palestine, you talk about the overarching message I choose to take at the end of my doppelganger journey is it's time to loosen the grip on various forms of proprietary pain and selfhood, to reach toward many different forms of possible connection and kin, toward anyone who shares a desire to confront the forces of annihilation and extermination and their mindsets of purity and perfection. Faced with the ultimate doppelganger threat, the flip into fascism that is already well underway in many parts of the world, this ability to melt some of the hard, icy edges of identity, however we earned those defenses may be, will be important to any hope of success we have. It will not be enough to protect our people. We will need to have the stamina of true solidarity, which defines our people as all people. Whew. I mean, that is like, that is so fitting for this moment, as we are being told, those who are calling for ceasefire are being told, but we have to protect our people.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is, I mean, if there's the one solace for me in this moment, and it's a small one, has been the presence of groups like Jewish Voice for Peace, and If Not Now, who really embody, and publications like Jewish Currents. I quote Ariel Angel right before that passage,
Yes.
saying, we are going to need each other as we fight fascism. And she's writing this from a Jewish perspective, because I think there is a generational shift going on right now where, and this is some of the history I get into in the book, is Judaism used to be such a contested space before the Holocaust. There were so many different possible answers to the problem of anti-Semitism. There was the Bund, which my friend Molly Crabapple is writing a book about right now, which I can't wait to read, which was this, and the Bundists would fight with the Zionists, who were saying, safety is to be found over there in Palestine. And the Bundists had this concept of here-ness, that we fight where we stand in coalition with other oppressed peoples. And yes, we protect our Yiddish culture and our Jewish culture, and we have our, militias, and we fight the fascists. And anti-Semitism was used, including anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, to break apart those multi-ethnic coalitions. But after the Holocaust, so many different possible answers to the question of how do we confront fascism were either completely
Diverted.
wiped out, or just there were just a few people who remained. But so it seemed like there was just one possible answer,
right?
And that was this militarized fortress state that would not join together with other oppressed people, but would just try to, like I said, put a gun to its head and force it into submission. And we are in this moment where, I think we're seeing a rebirth of the anti-war movement, and also a peace with justice movement. I've been on the board of Jewish Voice for Peace for a decade and a half. They used to have 3 staff people, and I don't think they were all full-time, and now they are this amazing growing organization that can buy a full-page ad in the New York Times, can shut down Grand Central Station, had a massive civil disobedience in Congress. But most importantly is working in coalition with many other groups, and building that kind of solidarity away from proprietary pain. And I see all these signs that younger Jews are holding that say, like, there's one that has like a possible multiple choice, like never again to the Jews, never again to anyone, and like they check never again to anyone. And I think there's a generational shift underway. It's not everyone. But it is a big shift. And I think these larger, like old line legacy Zionist organizations and Jewish organizations that claim to speak for all Jews, but define that as just offering blanket support for Israel,
Right.
Are freaking out at this generational shift, right?
Yes.
Are freaking out that this universalist never again is surging among a younger generation, and they're losing control of the narrative. And I'm really just so happy that these groups exist, that they've been organizing, that they're staying true to principles, that it is, I'm just very.
And it has to do with the rise of Netanyahu anyway, and the killing of the peace process, right? And the fact that that's been dead in the water. So if you're a 20-year-old and sort of this is all and you've seen, you've already seen like 6 or 7 wars on Gaza, it's like at a certain point, and then now with the mass Israeli casualties, it's just like, you know, it makes sense that Israel's losing its grip on young American Jews specifically. And I just wish that yeah, that like here-ness and like needing each other were it's popular as hell. I mean, the majority of Americans believe we should be using diplomacy. Secretary Blinken said there is no military solution to this. So basically, we're just waiting on like a body count number to be reached, or who knows, or to push them all into the desert. It's wild.
Well, they're engaging in ethnic cleansing. We have to be very clear. Come back to the shock doctrine. You know, this is the most grotesque example of the shock doctrine I have ever seen, which is using a shock, using a trauma to ram through a pre-existing agenda. And that pre-existing agenda is a massive land grab in the West Bank and liquidating the population of Gaza, you know, into Egypt. And they're doing it, right?
Yeah.
And they're doing it in the name of avenging Jewish blood while not even trying to get the hostages.
I know. This is wild. What's going on, Frantifa? If you haven't already, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that button. And also, you can become a patron and support the show every single week. Get access to bonus episodes and exclusive merchandise. Patreon.com/bitchuationroom. Do it.